I just wanted to jump on and thank Sahana. Sahana is our managing editor at Glass Quarterly, and I wanted to thank Sahana so much for her technical assistance for our first ever live version of Glass Quarterly. So we're so excited. This is a debut, and thank you all who have tuned in. And we're also recording this in case some people weren't able to make this time. There will be a posting of this video on YouTube. The goal is to make it free and open to the public. We will be there's no membership required, no fee. We're excited to share all of the things that we do at the magazine and to celebrate the Glass community through this series. We're going to wait, I think, just one more minute for a few more people to join. And we are, in the meantime, all ready to go and very excited to share with you two special guests who are joining us today, the author of the cover article of this issue, as well as the subject of the cover article of this issue, which I will review in exactly 1 minute when we start this presentation. So just bear with us until it clicks over to 2:05, which I think will be. So thank you, everybody. Again, this is the first edition of Glass Quarterly Live, a new initiative at Urban Glass. It's going to take a deep look at the summer 2025 edition that, if you are a subscriber, you may have just received. And if you aren't, you can find out more about what's inside this issue, which is arriving in mailboxes and in newsstands just about now. So Glass Quarterly Live is made possible by Montague Gallery, Rego Auctions, the Stanza del Vetro in Venice, Traver Gallery in Seattle, and of course, Urban Glass. We are published by Urban Glass, and the magazine is a program of Urban Glass in Brooklyn, New York, which has published Glass magazine since 1979. And it's a nonprofit publication produced by a nonprofit art center, depends on the support of a very important board of directors and other supporters of Urban Glass. So we're very grateful for that. So today we're going to look at the cover article, as I mentioned, of this just released summer issue, number 179. I'm very pleased today to have Bree Chesler, the artist, Ellie Sevier, the contributor for Glass Magazine, and myself, the editor. So before we get started, I do want to list a content warning because there may be some potentially sensitive topics around abuse and sexuality that could come up in the course of this discussion, just in case that's something that we wanted to make sure people were aware there was a possibility. In addition, how to ask a question. So this is actually a Zoom webinar. So we don't do just a chat, but instead we ask people to type their questions into the Q&A, which you can do at any point. You won't disturb us by typing in any questions that occur to you during our discussion today. And toward the end, we will go through the questions and read them off. So please feel free to contribute. We'd love to hear your feedback and your thoughts on the discussion. So the cover of this issue, we're very pleased to have Bree Chesler with us. This is the artist, and this is one of her works. Her work is immersive. Her work is installation primarily, and it mixes materials, including glass primarily, with many other materials, which we'll discuss in the course of this conversation. This is the opening of the cover article. We call it Earthly Delights, and it's written by Ellie, who's also on this call. We're very pleased with the opportunity to go in deeper to what was already a very significant article in the magazine. What you're seeing here is actually the installation as it was installed at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma. It just closed in March of this year. So this is very current work that just closed at the Tacoma Museum of Glass in March of 2025. I want to give a quick tour of the other features of this issue that have just come out. We have a big piece on the expansion of the Chrysler Museum of Art in Norfolk, Virginia, which just tripled in size its glass studio and put in what is like the state of the art for performance. It's really a theater setup that would make any theater company jealous. And it's a center for performance art, for using glass as a way to perform and expanding out beyond the object into performance art. We also have a big look at the work of Anna Mlasowski, who's based in Seattle, also teaches in Europe, is originally from Germany, and she currently has her first mid-career museum retrospective at the Coburg, Germany, at the European Museum for Modern Glass. And this is an article by our London correspondent, Emma Park, which really looks at Anna's unique art career and also the ways that Anna sees herself as somewhat separate from the mainstream and how that informs so many aspects of her work, and it's a really insightful piece. If you've been following Anna's work, one of the most important young up-and-coming artists in glass, this is a really important article for you to know about. We also have the pleasure of including Samantha DiTio, who's a former curator at the Museum of Art and Design in New York City. And she continues to be a contributing editor to the magazine. And she's written some very thoughtful pieces about performance art, speaking of performance art, other topics. And this is her meditations on the use of mirror, not just in glass art, but through the history of culture, really. And it goes way back into ancient times and how mirrors have been used by artists and others in cultures around the world. And it's a fascinating look, a very important way to educate yourself more about art history, in addition to how mirrors function. I had the pleasure of spending some time with Judith Schechter at her studio in a townhouse in Philadelphia before this major work of hers called Supernatural was shipped off to the Michener Museum of Art, where it's now on view. Later, it will be going to the Museum of Craft in San Francisco. And it's a really amazing step in Judith's evolution as she's gotten more and more into larger scale work, taking stained glass from something smaller in some of her early light boxes. She's been doing architectural installations that she did a few years ago at Eastern State Penitentiary, where she put the windows of the prison all filled with stained glass. And now you can actually go into the work. And I think it's a really important piece and an important step in Judith's career. And we'll be traveling around the country in the next months into 2026. Get a really up close and personal look at this important work in this issue. But we do more than reviews. I'm sorry, we also do reviews in addition to features, and the reviews are only available in the print magazine. And here we have an example of just two reviews in the current issue. One of them is a contemporary art gallery in New York City showing Joseph Kossuth's, a very important conceptual art that uses a lot of neon, and mirrors, in fact, are also a big part of Joseph's work. And this is a major retrospective of his at Sean Kelly Gallery. We also have Glass Life Forms, which is an ongoing series at the Pittsburgh Glass Center, looking at the relationship between glass and nature. And we have a really neat investigation of that work and the general ways that glass can mimic and be very close to nature, which will come up again in our conversation today with Bree, who works with glass and its connections to the body and to nature. I also wanted to point out in the current edition, we're very proud to include an essay by Erin O'Connor. She's a professor and also has just published a book. It's coming out in the fall. Columbia University Press is releasing Firecraft. And we have an essay that's drawn from the contents of the book that looks at the founding of the United States and how there was a glassworks at Jamestown, Virginia, which Erin discusses as sort of the place where the new world was being forged, was actually in a glass studio or glass hot shop. And it discusses a lot of the ideas that come up larger in her book. But it's really fascinating how America, glass was present at the founding of the American identity and culture. Really neat piece. We also have an editor's letter each issue. We cover the news, Carol White announcing that she's going to be stepping down. We also are really proud of this article where there's a Vermont museum that really borrowed heavily from the Museum of Glass, where they have their own, designing glass by kids. And at the at the Museum of Glass, that's where they really innovated this idea. And to tell a full story of how this really important program got started and to give credit where credit is due, I think is really important. One of the things at Glass Magazine that we take pride in is sort of defending the integrity of the people who originated new ideas in glass. And we're trying to do that here by acknowledging Ben Cobb and the rest of the team at the hot shop at the Museum of Glass, who really were the ones who forged this program. And the museum director in Vermont basically saw the catalog and cut and pasted it, which is great, but we wanted to give credit where it's due. Every issue also has an education guide where you can find out about where to learn about glass, suppliers directory where you can learn about where to buy glass. And if you do subscribe, you get the glass directory every year, which is like a phone book with everything, everybody who teaches glass around the world, not just in the United States, and all the suppliers. Encourage you to look for that. If you do subscribe, that comes free in the winter. But I wanted to make one quick note, which is there are two different products. We have an online publication called the Glass Quarterly Hot Sheet, where we give breaking news, brief artist interviews, and that's available for free. Separate from that, and the content is different. I just want to make that point very clear. We also have a print publication only available to subscribers, exclusive content, and it is That's where our reviews appear. That's where our features appear. And it's got sort of a lot of work that goes into this type of scholarship. I wanted to let you also know that because you're watching today, we have a special Glass Quarterly Live promotion, which I'll tell you about. If you do decide to subscribe and you go to subscribe today or any time after today, there's an opportunity to apply a promo code, which I've circled here. If you enter GQ Live, that's not an O, but that's a Q there, GQ Live, you will get this edition we're talking about now will come to you free, and your subscription will not begin until the fall edition. So it's like getting 5 issues instead of 4. I really encourage you to consider that, signing up for that at urbanglass.org/glass. So I'm now very pleased to introduce Ellie Sevier. She is a glassmaker and an arts writer, and she's based in the Pacific Northwest. Ellie was born in Tacoma. She was first introduced to glass as a student at Hilltop Artists, and she holds a BA in journalism and publishing from Emerson College. She graduated last year. She continues to blow glass and she continues to write and brings a uniquely knowledgeable perspective to the issues around glass. And she's become a regular contributor to Glass. You might know her writing from the last edition, where she wrote the amazing cover article about Dan Friday in our spring magazine. Also very pleased that Bree Chesler has joined us. Bree is our featured artist in this issue. She's known for mixing glass with other materials. She discovered glass when she was studying metal and foundry processes at the Kansas City Art Institute. And she cites the swamps of Florida, which is where she grew up, as inspiration for the chaotic elements of nature in her art. So Bree was awarded the 2019 Pilchuck Emerging Artist in Residence. She was a 2020 Hauberg Fellow, and she was a recipient of the Sachs Emerging Artist Award in 2021. She taught as an instructor at Pilchuck in 2022, and that same year she had her first solo exhibition in Seattle, which was at the Center on Contemporary Arts, where she unveiled Untamed, The Anatomy of Desire, which was a gallery-filled installation. And her residency in the Museum of Glass, which was not like just 2 years ago, was culminated in a reinstallation of Anatomy of Desire, which was on view at the Museum of Glass and only closed in March. So I'm very pleased to welcome Bree. Here's a picture quickly of her installation as it was installed at the Museum of Glass. And I'm going to now invite Bree to join us in just trying to stop the share, which is a little tricky with the full screen. Okay, so Bree, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very grateful for you to be here today, and thank you as well, Ellie. And Bree, I wanted to see if you could share a little bit about your background in a short slide presentation where you tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm Bree. I'm going to share my screen with you. Here we go. So I grew up in a town called Jupiter Farms, Florida. This is what it looked like, just to give you some perspective on the kind of aesthetic and nature I'm drawing from. This is my house nestled in the swamp there. And then this is me in middle school. This was really when I got serious about the arts. And you can see I'm working on some large scale woodcut printmaking that we used to do a project where we would roll over them with a steamroller. So this is really how printmaking and 2D imagery started my path on the arts. Then into high school, this is how my work developed, always drawing from the body. And then in college, I went to school at the Kansas City Art Institute. They didn't have a glass program. I was in the sculpture program, which was mostly focused on metalworking. But they did have a glass fusing elective. So that's really where I got my introduction to the material. Just to give you background on this image, this is the first drawing that really inspired my glass pieces. That's what I interpreted as. This is my first glass piece I made. And then my work evolved a little bit more delicately. I took a flame working class in 2012, I believe, at Pilchuck. And so my work got a little bit more three-dimensional. Integrated installation in the mix. I've always been interested in installation, but this was the first time I had the ability to take over a full space. So all of the hanging elements in the center are glass, as well as some of the wall pieces. And then I went back to Florida and I didn't have access to glass. My work really changed. It got dark. I started revisiting some environments and situations that weren't that healthy and left me with a lot of trauma when I had left them. And so I was making work about that. So this is really where my work started to evolve into a more kind of grotesque aesthetic. Tried to start marrying the two. In 20 at the end of 2014, early 2015, I moved to Seattle from Florida. I had taken an introduction to glass blowing class, and when I first started figuring out how I wanted to use the material, I worked really small. So here are some examples of how I was figuring out not only what materials I wanted to integrate with glass, but what I wanted to do with glass itself. And these are all pretty small, different kinds of glass making, um, including casting, fusing, glass blowing, flame working, really anything I can get my hands on. And then I started to integrate the installation element back in. And my piece, Fun, Flirty, and Festering, debuted at the Bellevue Arts Museum in 2018 at their Glasstastic show. And that's really what started the ball rolling for me career wise. This was the first time anyone in the industry or really in Seattle had seen my work on display. 2019, I was an air at the Pilchuck Glass School, and that allowed me to make a lot of the work that you're going to see in my exhibition we're talking about today, Untamed, the Anatomy of Desire. Okay, there's the first rendition of that, and then you'll see the current rendition.
Thank you so much, Bree. Thank you for that wonderful wonderful biography. I wanted to mention to Ellie that the article that we just published in the magazine was over 4,000 words, and I think it set a record for perhaps the longest and most researched article that we perhaps have ever run in the magazine. And I think it's an amazing piece, and I know we worked closely together on it. But what was it about Bree's work in particular that inspired such interest and such an effort to document and to find out more about it?
First of all, I love that fact. Thank you for sharing. That means a lot. Bree's work has always sparked my interest. I remember the first time I encountered it was at Fulcrum Gallery in the Hilltop neighborhood of Tacoma. It's a really small gallery, and there was a local show, and I believe it was Tasty that was in that, and really stuck with me. And I think because of the mixture of really bold aesthetics, and also this underlying discomfort that it evoked in me. So I was kind of followed her work ever since then. And obviously, with the amazing exhibition at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma, I thought it was really timely moment to talk to her. And then once I did, it just kind of unfolded from there. And I discovered all these amazing parts about you and your practice. And it just really built on this very strong foundation of my respect for you as an artist and your work. So was just very honored to even get the chance to chat with you about that and to get to share more about you with our audience.
I think as someone
So
who knows so much about glass yourself, Ellie, I mean, like you're not just just a writer. I mean, of course, that's wonderful that you write about glass, but the fact that you've been in glass yourself for 10 years, I mean, you really identified something about Bree's work that interested you from the material as well. Yes.
definitely, yeah, I think it also struck my interest because it was something new that I hadn't seen before, and you were really working with glass in a very unique way, which perfectly transitions into my first question. So the article opens with this quote from you about your relationship with the material glass. And you say something about how glass is always read very body to you. And you also talk about your relationship with the material in the hot shop and outside of the hot shop and how that has developed. So I was wondering if you could expand on what that means, glass reading as body, and how you connect the body to the material and how that relationship has developed, like I said, in the hot shop and outside of it.
Yeah, so for me, I think a lot about the material relationship I have as a maker and what I'm trying to convey in the work. So glass always stuck out to me because it was very intimate and sensual in the sense that, yes, you have to work on a team and very closely with people, but at the same time, you're literally the pendulum for this material. So you are the axis that it's growing from. And it is an extension of your body in that way. And so I think about that dynamic a lot, how all of your little minute movements are reflected in the material, how your emotional responsiveness is captured in the material. And two, I think a lot about how glass has this history of being this reflection in this capsule for people throughout time. We've captured our own image, we've used it to put things that we find valuable. We use it as an industrial material. And so, in a lot of ways, we're constantly approaching it in the world where we're entranced by the fact that it's in a way capturing ourselves. That reflection is always there. And the quality of the actual membrane itself, once you put air into it, I think really responds to physics in the same way our body does in a lot of ways. And our relationship with it is almost opposite in the sense that we look at our bodies oftentimes as something that are indestructible until they're fragile to us, whereas glass we're constantly looking at as something fragile, but in reality, it has a lot of strength. So I think that duality is um, really alluring for me.
I think that's really a wonderful parallel that you just drew. And another thing that I find really interesting about your sculptures is how you use glass in different ways. You have pretty much touched on like every application of glass from casting, neon, flame working, blown glass. Could you speak to that a little bit about, exploring glass in all of its avenues?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I think that it's one, a personal challenge in a lot of ways. I really feel like I've used so many different materials that it's become very intuitive for me to use a lot of them and to pick up on things naturally. But glass is something that always pushes me to focus and to push the boundaries a little bit more because there's so many variables that I can't control that I am constantly learning something new. And so in that sense, all the different processes and applications of what you can do with the material is fascinating because they all give you such different results on the surface, on the form it's taking, on the whole process itself. And so I really like to highlight that in my work. I like to play with the idea of the different identities that materials can take on. And so, in that sense, I really like to delve in to the complexities of what glass can do as a material and either take away from those or amplify them within the work.
If I could jump in with a quick question on the piggyback on that. In Seattle, I mean, this is maybe a bit of a generalization, but there's so much of a premium on like, really perfect technique in some cases. Like it's a center for, exquisite technique in glass, I would say. And did you feel, being based in Seattle and taking a lot of chances with the glass that you use? I mean, you work with the glass with a very different starting point than somebody who's really trying to be like totally tight and on center. Like there's a lot of that aspect of glass culture, I think, in Seattle. So was that at all like, did you feel any pressure, or were you kind of like okay breaking rules, or were you kind of approaching it like, how did you engage with maybe like some others in the glass community that have a very rigid sense of what glass should be?
Yeah, I definitely felt that pressure. I felt it, I think, because, like you said, it is such a bubble of technique and talent here. But I also felt it just personally. I think, artists always want to do their best, whether or not that's technically. And so for me, it was this constant battle of remembering what was important to me as an artist and also maintaining a certain level of understanding and technique with the material to do what I do with it. And so I, in a lot of ways, know a lot of things that people who are technically advanced about glass don't know because I have pushed it to those boundaries. I would say that was my biggest fear when I first showed that piece at the Bellevue Arts Museum, but I was met with like such amazing support that that really dissolved, and I really tried to mute that dialogue within myself. And then it just became a thing where all of the artists around me recognized that I valued glass in a different way than they did, and they would give me a lot of their garbage art that I could then turn into something new. So it really became almost like this, like pay it forward, but also I'm going to take this off your hands so you feel less guilty about having to throw it away. And so it really worked out for both parties.
I love that. I remember us having a conversation previously about how you identify as an artist, and I asked you if you identified as a multimedia artist first or as a glass artist first. Do you want to kind of give the audience your answer to that question?
Absolutely. I would say I first identify as a glass artist. And I do that because all of my other material choices are in direct relationship to what I'm doing with the glass. And so at the core, at the crux of my work is really that conversation about the material, about its relationship to other materials and our connotations of those things.
Definitely. I think that is, at least for me, really reflected in the work. So I wanted to ask you about your approach to installation. I think we really see that in your your first solo show at Coca and then at Mog as well. Just how you embrace the physical space as a part of the piece. And you're very intentional about creating a very immersive environment for the viewer, for the public. So I was wondering how you decided that installation was so important to conveying the themes that you approach in your body of work, why you feel like it's so important in conveying those themes, and why as you showed in your slideshow, your very early work was a lot of objects. Why those objects weren't necessarily enough in their own to convey, and why you felt the need to, you know, make these big, beautiful installations.
For me, I feel like when I make an object, it's kind of just one part of the story. I think a lot about our relationship to space and this dynamic with it, where our spatial environments, architecture, and things are almost meant to be muted in our environment, and yet we spend so much time within them. And so, really taking that and then exploding it and being like, well, I'm going to build a new environment within this very familiar space. And in a lot of ways, it's a technique for me to jar the audience from the conventional relationship they have with that place or with artwork or with a viewing experience. And so I'm really trying to dictate their encounter of the work, but also the ambiance of the experience. So, when you think about space, I'm considering lighting, I'm considering depth and the layers of building up this narrative for people to kind of pick apart for themselves as they walk through it.
If I could just interject a question, I was going to say about that atmosphere and ambiance. I mean, you definitely are, and we called the article, sinister seductions, because there is a seduction, right? A visual intensity through the window of the gallery space. It draws you in with certain signals, right? That, neon light, certain colors, and then the forms themselves are often like quite suggestive of the body or of intimacy in textures or in visual, sort of abstracted, but you sort of have a feeling that you are being lured into some type of and this is what Ellie wrote about, how you're sort of feeling like you're being lured into something. And are you trying, would that be do you try to seduce the viewers through these installations?
Yeah, absolutely. I really try and have almost this intoxicating element to the work where I like to describe it as like an I spy. From far away, it reads as one thing, and then the closer you get, the more that is unlayered and revealed to you. And so it gives a different depth to the experience, but it also allows people to feel that tension of seduction, to feel that place where they're holding that friction of, do I want to get closer or do I want to step up further away?
I think that's really interesting how you balance, Andrew used this word earlier, kind of empathy for the viewer with also like this kind of something a little darker, more sinister, want to, you know, evoke discomfort. Um, would you talk a little bit more about that discomfort that is, I think, inherent under that work, inherent in your work, and kind of underlying a lot of these, bright, beautiful colors, forms, and all of that?
Yeah, so I like to think of it as a tension. And I think of it kind of like if you imagine what surface tension looks like when it's starting to bubble up on a glass. And that's the type of experience I'm trying to capture when I'm putting together an installation like this, or even just a piece of artwork. To me, what that does is it leaves the work ambiguous enough for someone to project their own meaning, their own narrative onto the work. But once they have the realization that that's what they're doing and what they're actually taking away from the work, like you had mentioned, Andrew, it is a little bit erotic. There is this hint of body, of sexiness. And so a lot of times they're met with that discomfort of, oh, but that was me that put that on the work. She didn't say that about it. She didn't say that it was this object or this part of the body. And so I really like to emphasize that aspect because I think what I'm really getting at is that all of us have the carnal side to ourselves. And then we all have the cultured society ordered side to ourselves where we know very much what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to think and feel about things. But in reality, what's hidden underneath is this very instinctual, carnal part of being a human that I think a lot of people fear. That's the discomfort they feel when it's revealed to them within the work. And so I think just the realization that we all kind of carry that hidden little creature in us, I'll say, is is really what I'm trying to amplify for the audience and hone in on.
But and also just that there's when you do look closer, like you were saying earlier, like from afar and up close, that same suggestive sexuality that's implied or directly, referenced in some cases where you have, a part that looks like genitalia or something, then becomes something else as you look closer and there's signs of bruising or signs of decay. There's something else there too that also, when you get up close, also kind of almost becomes repulsive. Like you're attracted, and then you're kind of like, wait a
Mhm.
minute, like what is going on here? Would you
Yeah.
agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's that kind of grotesque aspect, and that's what I'm trying to that's what I mean when I say carnal, is like there is this darkness, this decay that we feel inherently, whether it's guilt, whether it's shame, when we have these kind of reflections, especially centered on erotica or sexuality and intimacy. And so I like to play up that duality of the beauty and the grotesque, that push and pull, that tension that you kind of sit in those moments where you do want to be enthralled, but at the same time, you're unsure how deep you want to go into it.
Yeah, going off of that idea of the grotesque, a central theme of the article, and I believe a central part of your artistic practice, is transmuting trauma into art. I was wondering if you could tell us more about this relationship, between your practice and your trauma, your art and your trauma, and how that has developed over time, across your career.
Yeah, so I would say when I was young, it was really hard for me to tell anyone what was happening. Every time I did, I was kind of met with this nonchalantness or someone not believing me. And that's just because we're all very good at hiding our problems, right? And so as a kid, I, didn't have an outlet, and art really became my voice, and it became a necessity for me in the sense that it allows me to go to a space mentally and emotionally where I can dissect, I can digest and reflect on my experiences and the feelings that I really had around them, whether they're in the past or current. It doesn't really matter. I still do it to this day. And so, in that sense, it's cathartic for me, and it almost becomes obsessive at the end, like this obsessive meditation where I have to self isolate, I have to fixate. And that's when I'm doing all of the obsessive detailing and surface treatment that you see on the work. I'm like doing that in almost this like art mania mode where I'm just like, I have to do this, I have to finish it. And I'm at that point also really trying to interject whatever feelings and emotions I have about what I'm making and release it into that work and let it go. It's almost like a little funeral in my eyes. It's very emotional and intimate. And once I do that, I'm done with it. Like the work isn't mine anymore. I feel detached in a way. Not that I don't care about it or that I'm not proud of it, but it doesn't mean the same thing for me anymore because the making process is really the important aspect. And then I would say the experience of the audience is the other half of that aspect that's really important to me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Bree. I was going to just jump in for a second to say that Ellie was citing a couple artists, your predecessors, you could say, who have, you have gone into their experiences, many, traumatic experiences of their lives, and sort of harnessed that or worked on them through their artwork. Artists like Louise Bourgeois, who had a very complex relationship with her mother and her parents. Um, Tracy Emin, who works out all kinds of ideas in her installations through very autobiographical and raw kind of engaging of experiences that she's had in her life. Are there specific artists that you look to in your who give you inspiration or who your work is in dialogue with? Do you feel that is important to note?
Absolutely. I would say another classic is Ava Hess. I really like the way that she looked at forms and how they influence our psyche. I really like contemporary artists like Swoon. She's we'll call her like a printmaking graffiti artist who does large scale installations. Tara Donovan does a lot of installations with recycled material. Ernst Haeckel was a illustrator that illustrated these fantastical like microbiology installations. Iris Van Herpen, who does fashion that is very kinetic and ethereal. Casey Curran, who's, I believe, a Seattle local, does really beautiful kinetic work as well. And then also like my glass peers, like you had mentioned Anna in the magazine. I love her work. We are often in the same circle of people. And I know her and I really bounce off of each other conceptually when we're talking. Her partner, Matt Saz, also makes incredible installations. And even my studio mates like John Sharvin and Minhee England, I think in a lot of ways they almost have the most influence over me because we do share a studio space, and that's my peer panel. Those are the people I'm constantly going to for critique, for technical advice, for feedback or brainstorming. And so a lot of times I think we influence each other in ways we don't even really realize until after we make something.
So you bring up community, and that was something that I gathered from our previous conversations is very important to you, as a person and as an artist. So what does community look like to you, and why is it so important for you, for all of us, for your practice specifically? And also, if you wanted to touch a little bit more on this dynamic that you're alluding to, with John and Minhee.
Yeah, so community really stood out to me when I got into Pilchuck the first time. I was like, wow, I've never been in this healthy of an art community where people want you to learn from each other and want you to succeed, and felt supported in that way. And so coming from a background of like institutionalized art, I had a lot of competition. A lot of it was catty. It was hard to feel seen and also to feel not judged, for wanting to take chances and just be who I am, to be vulnerable. So when I first moved out here, I met Minhee and her then husband Jesse at my first glass job, and they really took me in. Minhee and I come from a background of similar things, and so we really connected in a way that I haven't ever connected with anyone else. And so we have continued to build this art family together of all of our friends and peers that are trying to do the art thing right now. And so for me, that's taken form in outreach. I do a lot of outreach that's coming from me feeling like I didn't have that as a youth. And so I like to provide that for all kinds of people who are struggling. I work a lot with Arts Connect down in Tacoma. I work with Hilltop sometimes. I work with Pratt. And then I also do a lot of work with Minhee and John for the Northwest Sarcoma Foundation, and we're hoping to broaden that to the Seattle Care Alliance, hopefully in the future. But as far as how I'm trying to continue that momentum, I am trying to build multiple programs right now to give back to the community. So I feel so grateful for what I've been able to accomplish in, I would consider, a pretty short amount of time. And so I would like to provide what I know back to the community. So KCJ and I are working on a professional practice outreach project to help artists better understand and prepare for applications and different kinds of professional practices. And then I'm also building a mobile hot shop that will be used for outreach for underserved communities. So, like I said, hospice patients, cancer patients, troubled youth, really anyone who's interested. So I'm trying to keep everything moving forward, and Minhee and John are also a part of that. We're all kind of pushing forward together. It's always easier to do something with other people.
It sounds like you're incredibly busy. Bree. I can't
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in for 1 second to mention, for those of you who are watching, there's a Q&A icon down at the bottom. If you did want to ask a question, please type it in. We have got about 10 minutes left, and we're going to continue with our questions, and we have a little bit of a wrap up coming up. But I want to hand it back to Ellie, but please do feel free to submit your questions through the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen, not the chat, but the Q&A. Okay, back to you, Ellie. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Definitely we welcome any questions. I wanted to end with my questions for you, Bree, asking what's next for you? Are there any projects you're working on that you're really excited about? Are you excited to take your work, in a new direction? Just anything that you wanted to share with us about that.
Yeah, so I am very busy. I'm actually about to leave for residency at Raven and Kelly Studio to work with Minhee and John a little bit. And then I'll be going to Pilchuck to be the AA for the Delatorre brothers. And I'll also be teaching a casting workshop there for their casting conference. Fun, Flirty, and Festering is going to be shown at the Fuller Craft Museum in Massachusetts in 2027. And then I am also going to be showing some neon in Port Angeles this fall. And then I'll be a visiting artist at Corning in October as well. So I have a bunch of stuff going on. I have some things planned for next year as well. But mostly I'm just trying to focus on honing in on the projects I mentioned earlier. And Minhee, John, and I have been expanding our shared home studio space. So that's been a big focus for everyone, is trying to get that up and running.
Wonderful. That's very exciting. Go ahead, Andrew. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we're kind of getting to the end of this hour, but I wanted to say, very big thank you to Bree for sharing so much on this call, and for sharing with Ellie and this amazing article that appears in the current edition of Glass magazine. Ellie, thank you as well for your time. And I'm just going to share my screen for just one moment to remind those of you who are watching that there is a promo code for the subscription for a special opportunity as a viewer of this recording or of this live event, GQ Live. When you go to the subscribe page at urbanglass.org/glass, you can apply this code and get this particular issue that we're discussing with the big feature article about Bree, as well as 4 additional issues will come to you starting in the fall. In addition, I wanted to share with you a special opportunity that we are offering people, which is to make an opportunity to sorry, there we go, to
Hello
donate.
everyone, my name is Sahana Ramakrishnan and I'm the managing editor of Glass Quarterly magazine. Before joining the magazine, I did my MFA in Savannah College of Art and Design and I studied a lot of printmaking there. So when we were thinking about ways to promote the magazine, I thought that a hand-printed tote bag would be a great way to do so. While thinking about the illustration for this tote bag, the biggest inspiration was my desk, because I work right in front of the physical archive of the magazine. And I also work very heavily with the digital archives. And I love sifting through the magazines over the years and seeing how drastically the visual design has changed since its conception in 1979. I therefore thought of paying a homage to this history of the magazine by creating an illustrated collage of various iconic covers of the magazine. I also created another version with just the logo of Glass that has changed over the years, because I also think that that's a really interesting marker of change visually over the years of Glass. Both these designs, as mentioned before, are printed in really sturdy tote bags. So if you are a huge enthusiast of Glass Quarterly magazine, if you're a glass artist yourself, or if you just want a cool tote bag to walk around with, this is the one for you.
Thanks. Thank you so much. And thank you, Sahana, for that great initiative. Sahana studied printmaking and it's sharing the knowledge with us through the special tote bag opportunity. So once again, thank you for all who have joined us. Thank you, Bree, once again, for all of your time and the beautiful work that you're doing. Thank you, Ellie, for the revealing article and in the current edition of Glass. Thank you, Sahana, for helping us run this. And thank you all for joining us for the first edition of Glass Quarterly Live. Many thanks and have a great afternoon.
Yes, thank you all so much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Bree. Thank you, Andrew.
you.
Everyone have a wonderful day.
Yeah.
Take care.
Okay.